A palace conspiracy involving the imperial physician Chen's family resulted in widespread punishment. My father died in vain, and I witnessed my mother being killed with my own eyes. My former friend showed his true face and subjected her to inhumane torture, while the man who fell in love with her turned. Chapter 1. Ending with Hatred. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At the end of April, the sky is filled with the vibrant vitality of winter and spring. The residence of the Minister of War was also full of joy, with red silk and cloth hanging on the corridor, and everyone was busy. Amidst this festive atmosphere, there is a secluded courtyard that appears very desolate, as if it has been forgotten, and it also exudes an inexplicable coldness in the blue sky and white sun. The door creaked open in the wind, and Zhang Quan, the servant guarding the door, glanced behind him and couldn't help but shiver. The person who was originally guarding this courtyard was the old lady beside the young lady, but today when the young lady got married, the old lady had to leave for a moment and asked him to take over. He asked curiously what person was locked in the old woman's room, but the old woman only said, "If you want to survive, don't ask blindly." There are always some hidden pickles in the wealthy households, and Zhang Quan knows not to look at what should not be seen and not to listen to what should not be heard. However, he was still young, and the more the old woman said that, the more he couldn't help but wonder. Seeing that the door had opened a crack, he decided to go over and take a peek, but at that moment, the rough old lady returned with a few servants, and Wang Xing quickly returned to his original position. "Let's go down, there's nothing more to do with you here," the old woman said and led someone into the room. After Zhang Quan left the courtyard door, he quietly hid on the side wall. In no time, he saw the woman and her group carrying an iron cage out. The iron cage was covered with black cloth, and when a gust of wind blew, a corner of the cloth was lifted. Zhang Quan was shocked to see the people inside the cage, and his eyes widened. The one locked in the cage is a woman. The woman curled up naked in a cage, her skin covered in patches of red and black burns, whips, and numbness like withered bark. The iron cage shook and shattered the blisters, and in an instant, it flowed out with ulcerative pus. Compared to her body, the woman's face was even more terrifying. The scars on her face were intertwined, clearly caused by sharp weapons, and those injuries had probably never been properly treated. In some places, they were still flesh and blood, which was shocking. The only thing that can be called intact on this woman's body is probably her fair arm that fell outside the cage, but that arm is soft and hanging, without any blood or bones. Zhang Quan was so frightened that his hands and feet became weak, as the woman in the cage happened to be watching him, her pitch-black eyes blinking without blinking, cold as if falling into an ice cellar. He hurriedly turned back and looked at the red silk hanging on the corridor, but couldn't feel any joy at all. He only felt that the deep courtyard was filled with terror everywhere. The cage was heavily thrown onto the ground, and two servants rudely dragged the people inside out. "Miss, I have brought you." The old lady sent out the two servants and stood respectfully at the door, guarding them. Chen shrank her body, painfully opened her eyes, and a pair of red embroidered shoes with gold threads stood in front of her. She struggled to lift her head, and the owner of the embroidered shoes was a woman with a charming smile and a fairy-like color. Her phoenix crown was draped over her, bright and beautiful like a noble peony. Chen stared fiercely at the woman in front of her with her eyes. "Sister Qing'er, do you think I look good today?" Su Qingfu's smile was gentle, and her bright red wedding dress accentuated her unparalleled beauty. "Do you think Xiaozhi would like my wedding dress?" Upon hearing this name, Shi couldn't help but feel a layer of pain in her hateful eyes. The man who once said to her, "Qing'er, your brother Xiaozhi will definitely marry you with 3 matchmakers, 6 betroths, and 8 large sedan chairs. Today, he will marry her as his wife. This person is none other than her, it is precisely the one in front of her. Her former friend was also the culprit who caused her family to sink and her family to perish." Thinking of her father, mother, and the dozens of people in the Chen family, Chen Haoxi wanted to immediately fight hard with Su Qing, but she had all 4 limbs broken and was unable to bear it. She could only hate to bite a silver tooth to pieces. Her father, Chen Hongxian, was a palace physician. 2 months ago, he had an affair with consort Sheng and conspired to poison the crown prince. He was then punished by the crown prince. Of course, all of this was framed, and the mastermind behind it was the Su family of the Ministry of War. Consort Sheng is the favored concubine of the emperor, and her family is the powerful mansion of the Qing kingdom. Today, the emperor fears the Qing family, but suffers from the lack of suitable reasons to kill them. Coincidentally, the crown prince suddenly died of poisoning, and Su Ningxuang's aunt, Lady Su, who was in the palace, also discovered that Empress Sheng had an affair with the imperial physician. She also found the same poison as the crown prince in Empress Sheng's bedroom. Such an obvious conspiracy, but even though the emperor knew something was amiss, he still followed the tide and tolerated this conspiracy with one eye open and one eye closed, taking advantage of the opportunity to take down consort Sheng and the Xinghua mansion behind him. Lust in the harem and murder of the crown prince are major crimes of plagiarism and extermination of the family. Even the prominent consort Sheng could not escape death, let alone her father Chen Hongxian, who was only a palace physician. My father was beheaded by the emperor while he was still in the palace, and then a criminal edict was issued to the Chu family to execute all male servants, and the female family members became military prostitutes. That night, the officials came in a fierce manner, and the male servants of the Chen family were executed on the spot, while the female servants were handcuffed and shackled. The entire Chen house was filled with blood and screams of sorrow. In a hurry, she could only leave with her mother and close attendants, but before she was about to escape from the mansion, she was blocked by Su Qingyun, the brother of Su Qingfu, and others. Su Qingyun wielded his sword and directly killed his mother and her maid in front of her. Chen Haoxi thought she would also die, but Su Qingyun chose to keep her and even set fire to the Chen family's mansion, publicly claiming that the mother and daughter of the Chen family would rather die than become military prostitutes. She set fire to herself and followed Dr. Chen. Then Su Haoxi secretly brought her back to the Su mansion and handed her over to Su Qingfu, resulting in 2 months of inhumane torture. The reason why Su Qingfu hates her so much and wants to destroy her body and face is all because of a man. Chen Haoxi laughed hoarsely like a rusty iron saw. Su Qingfu, you deliberately created the illusion that I am dead, afraid that when you will know that I am still alive. She laughed harder and harder, and the wound on her face was affected, with dark red blood flowing out, a terrifying look. You're afraid that once he finds out I'm still alive, he won't marry you. Su Qingfu, who came from a wealthy family, has admired the crown prince Wen Yu of the Marquis of Wuying's mansion since childhood. But she never expected that the young man, like the scorching sun in the morning, would ignore a group of noble women who admired him and fall in love with the daughter of a humble doctor. Su Qingfu was stabbed in pain by Chu Qing's words, and her hand quietly clenched in the bright red wedding dress. However, she always pretended and still smiled brightly, saying, Chen Haoxi, don't deceive yourself. If brother Yu really has a deep affection for you, how could he marry me 2 months after you die? Chen Haoxi didn't laugh anymore. She lay on the ground, hoarse and panting, unsure if it was a painful wound or a heartache. It is a fact that she fell in love with Wen Yu, and it is a fact that he once swore a solemn oath to her. He dissipated his past feelings 2 months after her death, and it is also a fact that he married her. Looking at Chen Haoxi's disheveled and miserable appearance, Su Qingfu lowered his head slightly, as if admiring a masterpiece of unparalleled beauty. You wouldn't really think that as a daughter of a mere imperial physician, you could become the crown princess of the Marquis of Wuying's mansion, would you? Su Qingfu covered his lips and chuckled lightly, with your identity, you don't even deserve to be a concubine. Suddenly, a mouthful of salty smell surged from her chest, causing unbearable pain in Chen Haoxi's heart. It was for herself, for her parents, and for the dozens of people in the Chu family. She stared fixedly at Su Qingfu. If her gaze could kill someone, then she had already treated this woman Lingqi countless times. She had never noticed before that this beautiful woman, who looked like a fairy on the outside, was so ugly inside. She even regarded Su Qingfu as a close friend who had treated her sincerely, calling her sister Su for a year. Now, looking back, how foolish and ridiculous she was at that time. "Why are you looking at me like this?" Su Qingfu chuckled lightly. "Sister Qing'er, it's not anyone else who caused your Chu family to be full, it's you yourself." She stood up straight and looked down at Chu Qing from top to bottom. "Dr. Chen has a daughter like you, who is shameless and only seduces men. The accusation of having an affair with the Empress Dowager for him, who is a father, is understandable." Chen Haoshi couldn't bear to hear Su Qingfu insult her father who had died in vain, so she exerted all her strength and spat a mouthful of blood onto her body. Drops of dark red blood fused onto Su Qingfu's bright red wedding dress, appearing very eye-catching for some reason. Shengjing made the joyful wedding dress look old and unbearable. The wedding dress was dirty, and Su Qingfu could no longer hold on to the demeanor of a wealthy lady. In a fit of anger, she ordered her mother-in-law, "Show me her wrist. Since she likes to vomit blood, let her gradually drain all the blood from her body." The old woman received the order and quickly cut open Chen Haoshi's wrist with a dagger. The sharp blade cut through her skin, and Chen Haoshi didn't feel any pain at all. She stared at Su Qingfu and burst out laughing loudly, "Su Qingfu, wait for me. Even if I were a ghost, Chen Haoshi wouldn't let you go. I will curse you day and night for not dying. Curse your Su family, everything will collapse." The woman laughing on the ground had large areas of ulceration on her skin, her hands and feet twisted into strange shapes. Her face, which was no longer visible, was covered in ferocious cuts, covered in blood. Especially her eyes, filled with immense hatred, seemed to burn through everything, and the hoarse voice from her poisoned throat was grinding against human skin inch by inch, as if she were a deadly demon crawling out of the hell of Shura. Su Qingfu looked at Chu Qing like this and suddenly felt a chill from his feet. At the end of the crossbow, she forced herself to remain calm and said, "Chen Haoshi, while you wait to die, open your eyes wide and watch carefully. How did brother you marry me?" Soaking her wrist in the cold water, she quickly dyed the basin bright red and felt death approaching. Chen Haoshi had no fear at all. Instead of suffering daily torture, dying is actually a kind of liberation. She is not afraid of death, she just has a grudge in her heart. My father, who was unwilling to be honest all his life, would always bear the charges of being shameless until his death. He was unwilling to gently spoil his mother, who was innocent and suffered under the knife of the wicked. He was unwilling to let dozens of people in the Chu family die and be exiled. Su Qingfu is right in saying that the source of these hardships is all because of her. If she had not fallen in love with Wen Yu, Su Qingfu would not have been jealous of her love, and her father would not have been framed by Su Pin for having an affair with his concubine. The Chen family would not have suffered disasters as a result. The sun was heading west, and the setting sun was like blood. Finally, the noisy sound of drums and gongs came from the Su mansion. Su Qingfu found a good spot for Chen Haoshi, where she could vaguely see outside through the window lattice. There was a man dressed in red who was walking towards her step by step, but he didn't come to save her. Instead, he led her enemy onto a sedan chair. The male and female figures were red and glaring, and the auspicious clothes on her body seemed to be even redder than the blood she shed, which hurt Chen Haoshi's eyes. Reluctant to the man who once said he only loved her, he turned around and married someone else. Her body was already cold, and her gaze began to blur until the pair of bright red figures disappeared. Chen Haoshi finally closed her eyes with resentment. "Father, mother, it's my daughter who apologizes to you. If there is an afterlife, my daughter will definitely find out these people who have caused us to sink into our family one by one, and repay them with blood and blood." Chapter 2. Dreams or the Afterlife. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mississippi, Mississippi. A 15 or 16-year-old girl stumbled and stumbled, her peach-pink upper collar dyed a bright red, and blood flowed out through the fingers she held on her chest, dripping onto the hem of her skirt. Sheer! Sheer! Turning her head, another woman in a dark blue jacket lay on the ground, trembling as she extended a hand. Her eyebrows and eyes were so gentle, but there was a blood line running across her neck, and blood spread from her cheeks, making the ground crimson. The woman on the bed suddenly opened her eyes. The sound of rain outside the window, the fragrance of ink swirling indoors, and a faint flame flickering in the candle holders, it turned out to be another dream. Chen, how she didn't expect that she really had an afterlife. But rather than calling it an afterlife, it is more accurate to say that her soul has taken over someone else's body. She was cut off from her wrist and drained of blood by someone ordered by Su Qing in the backyard of the Su mansion. When she opened her eyes again, she became Yan Ashu, the illegitimate daughter of the current courtier Yan Guogong, who was exiled to Yuezhou. However, in the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed since her death, and with the rest and recovery in Yuezhou over the past year, her enemies had already lived a peaceful life in Shengjing for 6 years. It's been too long. After lying still for a moment, Yan Axu got up and went down to the ground, his long black hair falling on his back, and his skin was covered in frost and snow. The rain hasn't stopped yet, there's no need to rush like this, you can sleep for a while longer. Behind her came the clear voice of a man. Your Highness, you should wake me up. Yan Axu put on all her clothes before turning around. Her small face, which was the size of a palm, was beautiful and radiant, making the cloudy and rainy days outside appear a bit brighter. She wouldn't stay here on weekdays. It seems that Ning Tingzhou's body is recovering better and better. It was only when tonight ended later that she was so tired that she accidentally fell asleep. The man on the bed had a loose collar, a slightly thin face, and a pale complexion, like a person who had lived in the dark without light for a long time. However, he was extremely good-looking, with half-scattered black hair and a warm smile, exuding a noble aura like pine, bamboo, and ink. Ning Tingzhou smiled lightly and said, I want you to sleep a little longer as I see you sleeping soundly. Yan Axiu pushed out a wooden wheelchair from the side, went back to the bed to tidy up Ning Tingzhou's clothes, and then carefully helped him up. Based on the current situation, the fourth prince's legs can move as usual in less than 6 months. Thanks to you, Ning Tingzhou supported Yan Qingli's shoulder and sat in a wheelchair, watching her turn to tidy up the silver needle on the table. Chen Haoshi, what bad dream did you have just now? The woman paused slightly before calmly saying, Chen Haoshi died 6 years ago. Now that I am Yan Axiu, your highness, don't call me wrong again. Her current body is Yan Guogong's illegitimate daughter, but ironically, Yan Guogong still doesn't know that he has an illegitimate daughter living in Yuezhou. Yan Axiu's birth mother, Gu Shi, was originally a daughter of a pharmaceutical merchant in Yuezhou City. 19 years ago, Gu Shi went to Shengjing with her father to do medicinal business and coincidentally met the elegant Duke of Yanguo on the banks of the Lishui River in the suburbs of Beijing. At that time, Duke of Yanguo was still very young, had a dignified appearance, and was skilled in eloquence. She fell in love with the beautiful Gu Shi at first sight. Gu had a pure and kind heart, and was constantly coaxed by the sweet words of Yan Guogong, an old hand in the flower garden. During their time in Shengjing, the two often met privately, and finally had a night of happiness the night before Gu's return to Yuezhou. Yan Guogong never revealed his true identity to Gu Shi, only stating that he was a Juren who went to the capital for scientific research. Afterwards, he left a jade pendant as a token for Gu Shi, stating that he would personally go to Yuezhou to propose marriage after consulting with his elders. After Gu returned, she had a body, but unfortunately, the left and right waited for Duke Yan to come and ask for marriage. The body grew bigger and bigger, and things couldn't be hidden. It was soon discovered by Mr. Gu. Master Gu was furious and sent people to Shengjing with jade pendants to inquire from various sources. Finally, he found out that the other party was not a Juren at all, but a high-ranking official of the court, Duke Yen of the state. Moreover, Duke Yen had already had a wife and concubines, which was a deliberate attempt to deceive the Gu family. Yen Guogong holds a high position of power, which cannot be offended by a small family of pharmaceutical merchants. Mr. Gu had to endure his frustration and then ordered the Gu family to have the fetus in his womb removed. But at that time, Gu was already 5 months pregnant and the fetal movement was severe. She firmly refused to remove the child. Back then, Mr. Gu was also a prestigious figure in Yuezhou City. It was a shameful thing for his daughter to have an affair with someone and get pregnant. In a fit of anger, he publicly severed his father-daughter relationship with Mr. Gu and even kicked her out of the house. After leaving home, the proud Gu family did not go to the capital to seek refuge with Duke Yen. Instead, they ran a medical clinic alone in a village outside the city of Yuezhou, seeking medical treatment for the poor. Saying it's a medical clinic, it's actually just a consultation stall. She relies on the silver she earns to support herself and the fetus in her womb. After giving birth to Yen Axu, Gu's body also fell ill and passed away at the age of 10. At that time, Gu was very worried about her daughter's future life on her deathbed, so she planned to let Yen Axiu go back to Yuezhou City to seek refuge with her grandfather, Mr. Gu, after her death. However, she was afraid that Mr. Gu, who had a good face, would not recognize this granddaughter. Under the pressure of helplessness, she also informed her about the jade pendant and her biological father, saying that if her grandfather was ruthless and did not recognize her, she would go to the capital to find her biological father. After Gu's death, 10-year-old Yen Axiu obediently followed his mother's instructions and went to find Master Gu. Master Gu regretted hearing the news of his daughter's death and immediately took Yen Axiu back to Gu's mansion. Yen Axiu also put aside the matter of searching for relatives in the capital. Unfortunately, in times of turmoil, Yen Axiu's maternal grandfather and uncle died during a business trip during the war. When people leave the tea cold, Yen Axiu's family is gradually unable to support such a large family business. The servants in the mansion steal and run away, taking away a lot of valuable things. As a last resort, she sold off her family's property and dismissed many servants, leaving only one house to live in and returning to her mother's previous business of practicing medicine and seeking medical treatment. But she is a weak woman with outstanding appearance and no support, always coveted by malicious men. Under unbearable harassment, Yen Axiu finally prepared to go to Shengjing to seek refuge with his biological father, Duke Yen, at the age of 17. Unfortunately, she encountered a bandit not far from Yuezhou. When Chen Haoshi woke up from Yen Axiu, this delicate young lady had already been stabbed twice and was about to be insulted by a bandit. Fortunately, she met Ning Tingzhou, who passed by and intervened to save her. At that time, she only felt that the young man in the carriage was particularly familiar to her, and later realized that he was actually the son of Empress Sheng, the second prince of Emperor Changhui, who had an affair with her father. But she clearly remembered that before she passed away, this beloved second prince was only 16 years old, a charming young man. How could he have grown into a handsome and elegant nobleman as soon as he opened his eyes? And also broke both legs. Later, she found out that it had been 5 years since she woke up on Yen Axiu. Ning Tianlin smiled gently and said, "Okay, Su, you were just a nightmare." Yen Axiu didn't want to recall the events in her dream. She tidied up her scattered bun and said, "Your Highness, the rain has decreased. Ali will go back now." Seeing that Yen Axiu was in a hurry to leave, Ning Tingzhou's expression was slightly gloomy, but he quickly concealed it and nodded with a smile, saying, "Then I'll call Ji Xiang to see you off." "There's no need to bother Grandpa Ji Xiang," Yen Axiu politely declined. Her place of residence is only a few blocks away from Ning Tingzhou, not far away. "Your Highness, I need someone to take care of me at all times. I'll just go back on my own." After Yen Axiu left, a white-faced maid came in carrying a basin of water. Seeing the elegant and bamboo-like man still looking out the window, she couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, it's cool after the rain, be careful of your body." Upon hearing this, Ning Tingzhou withdrew his gaze. His expression remained warm, but his eyes no longer had the gentleness they had when he had just looked at the woman. Instead, they were replaced with an indifferent coldness. He played with a silver needle that Yan Qingli had dropped and casually asked, "Lucky, has the person you're looking for found a whereabouts?" Ji Xiang quickly placed the basin and reported, "Your Highness, the person has been found. I think they will arrive in Yuezhou in a few days." Ning Tingzhou's face lit up with a smile. He placed the silver needle in a sandalwood box and said, "That's great. She will definitely be very happy to give Ah Su this surprise before going back." With a smile on his face, Ji Xiang approached the man in the wheelchair with a basin of water, feeling mixed with joy and sorrow. Fortunately, it has been 6 years since the passing of the Empress Dowager, and the smile on His Highness's face has finally increased after meeting Miss Yen. What worries me is that the fourth prince seems to be treating the Yen girl too seriously. Ji Xiang was the person who followed Consort Sheng as soon as she entered the palace. He had seen too many foolish and resentful women in the palace, and he could tell from her eyes whether a woman had a man in her heart. But that Yen girl. Although she is young, he really can't see through. Although she is intimately connected to His Highness too, there are too many things hidden in her eyes, to the point where she cannot even see the love between children. If Your Highness likes such a cold-hearted and heartless woman, he doesn't know if it's a blessing or a curse. Chapter 3. Fearless Words. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yen Aksu walked on the cobblestone road with an oil paper umbrella, small droplets of water falling from the edge of the umbrella, slightly splashing her skirt. However, she didn't care and continued to walk calmly and slowly. Although it was still raining, there were several breakfast stalls on both sides of the alley, steaming hot and filled with human fireworks. Nowadays, the world is in chaos, and besides Shengjing, there are not many comfortable cities like Yuezhou in the Ning dynasty. The people of Yuezhou can still live and work in peace because there is a good governor of Yuezhou. Sheng Yizhi, the maternal grandfather of Ning Tianlin. In his early years, General Sheng Yizhi accompanied the late emperor to conquer the north and south, pacifying the Xiongnu and suppressing the northern barbarians, and expanding half of the territory for the Ning dynasty. He was appointed as a first-class Duke of Shenghua by the late emperor and held nearly half of the military power of the Ning dynasty. After Emperor Chonghui ascended the throne, he also followed the imperial edict of his predecessor and placed great importance on Duke Sheng. He even promoted Duke Sheng's youngest daughter to a noble consort, and his second prince Ning Tingzhou was exceptionally talented, surpassing the rest of the princes and winning the hearts of the saints. In the palace, the daughter and grandson of the Sheng family are the favored concubines and princes, while outside the palace, General Sheng is the powerful Duke of Sheng. Both emperors value the Sheng family so much, causing courtiers to secretly speculate in their hearts that if it weren't for the crown prince's status as the eldest son, then the throne would belong to the second prince Ning Tingzhou. Unfortunately, the principle of one emperor, one courtier has remained unchanged throughout history. Emperor Chonghui was not the late emperor, and he did not value the Shenghua mansion as much as he seemed on the surface. Instead, he became increasingly wary of the power of the Shengjia family in his heart. Finally, he successfully expelled the Sheng family by taking advantage of the serious crime of Consort Sheng's conspiracy to harm the crown prince. Consort Sheng was given a white silk ribbon, and Duke Sheng was stripped of his title, released from military power, and demoted to serve as the governor of remote Yuezhou. Although the position of prefect of Yuezhou is not small, it is truly incomparable to the former powerful Duke of Shenghua. As for the second prince Ning Tingzhou, the once proud son of heaven, when he learned that Consort Sheng had been executed, he hurriedly went to plead with Emperor Chonghui, but was scolded 100 times by the ruthless emperor's staff. At that time, he had just fallen off his horse and been injured while being hunted by the royal family. After 100 injuries, his muscles and veins were completely damaged, and he could only sit in a wheelchair from then on. Nowadays, General Shengjing is almost an old man, while the second prince Ning Tingzhou is still disabled. In the heart of Emperor Changhui, the Sheng family is no longer a threat to imperial power and cannot be a hidden danger. However, is the golden scale a thing in the pond? Emperor Changhui probably never knew that this prince, who had volunteered to recuperate in Yuezhou and seemed to have no ambition, had been secretly hiding his strength and waiting for an opportunity to reclaim everything he should have. Ning Tingzhou has never given up on treating his legs. He injured his tendons and veins. After 10 or 20 years, he will be able to recover them and one day stand up again. 10 or 20 years, that's really long enough. Yan Axiu hooked her lips, and her appearance was an unexpected joy for Ning Tingzhou. Because she can turn these long 10 or 20 years into 1 year. Although she is a woman, she has a high talent in medical skills. She not only inherited her father's medical skills, but also rose to prominence. Once upon a time, when her father encountered difficult and complicated diseases, he would privately discuss and seek advice from her. Initially, the crown prince was seriously ill, and even the capital of the imperial hospital concluded that he would not live for 3 years. It was still she who developed a prescription and handed it to her father. Only then did the father recover the crown prince's health. Her medical skills may not be considered the pinnacle of the world, but they are also unique. However, the poor crown prince ultimately couldn't escape death and, like her father, became a sacrifice for the emperor and those cunning and treacherous ministers to consolidate their power. Yo! It's Miss Gu from the Gu family. Why did she go for a consultation so early? A woman selling steamed buns saw Yan Qingli and greeted her. Wake up early and walk freely. Yan nodded at the woman and said no more. The woman was somewhat unsatisfied with her indifferent attitude, and as soon as she walked by, she spat softly, "Pooh. Those who show their faces are not obedient to women's morals. Walk around casually. Who would believe it? It's just dawn, and it's uncertain which wild man's bed they crawled out of. Shoo, keep it down." The middle-aged man next to him nudged the woman. It's not good to hear from the neighbors. It's not that he denies the woman's words, after all, who in a serious girl's family would openly become a doctor. You should know that there are many men among the patients, and even if you try to avoid suspicion, there will always be physical contact, which is really disrespectful. However, the medical skills of this Gu family girl are really good. Nowadays, with the chaos of war and chaos, no one can guarantee that they will not be sick or disaster-stricken, nor can they easily offend the doctors. What are you afraid of? It's just a daughter with tattered shoes. The woman pinched the man and said, "You old man, you wouldn't have seen the handsome appearance of these little tattered shoes, and your soul was hooked, right? Damn you talking nonsense. Why don't you sell steamed buns now?" The man quickly defended himself, but couldn't help but sneak a few glances at the woman's back after defending himself. In the slanting drizzle, the figure of the woman in white under the red paper umbrella is ethereal, slender and graceful, truly alluring. In the early morning, the alley was quiet, and the words of the couple fell in Yan Axiu's ear without leaving a word. She let out a meaningless smile. In this world, women are always treated unfairly and harshly. In her opinion, it is not the sole responsibility of a woman to have a man happy and a woman loving. Why is it always the woman who is pointed out after the incident? Miss Yan's mother, Gu Shi, had an unmarried daughter and was cursed by the world behind her back. However, the man who deceived the woman was able to continue to be a high-ranking national grandfather after a night of sexual activity. Even if it were known that there had been such a romantic affair in the future, people would mostly praise the good ability of the said national grandfather, to the extent that a woman would rather bear the blame than have a child for him. It is unreasonable for a young lady and her mother to rely on practicing medicine without stealing or stealing, while also being criticized for having to show off as a woman. Yan Axiu reached out her hand, and raindrops fell on her palm, which was cold, but her heart was even colder. The mansion of Gu Mansion is not very large, after all, the world is unstable, and a big family and business can easily attract attention. One year, Miss Preface wanted to go to the capital to search for relatives, so she dismissed the few remaining servants in the mansion, leaving only one personal maid, one cook woman, and 2 guards. Therefore, the small house now appears particularly deserted. "Miss, where have you been this morning? The maid has been looking for you for a long time." As soon as Yan Axiu entered the mansion, she saw a maid of her age rushing over. Although she was a maid, she was dressed even more ostentatiously than her master, with bright colors and excellent bracelets on her wrist. As she approached, the maid only remembered to hide the bracelet in her sleeve. Yan Axiu ignored her small actions and walked straight towards her yard. This maid's name is Wanqiu. She was originally a maid in the Gu mansion. When Miss Yan asked if anyone among the servants was willing to stay as her personal maid, Wanqiu voluntarily volunteered. But this late autumn is not a fuel-efficient lamp. She stayed because she saw that the Zhonggu family still had profits. After all, the skinny camel was bigger than the horse, and the Gu family was in dire straits. However, when Miss Yan sold her shop and property, there was still a lot of silver left in the warehouse. Miss Yan is kind and schemless, and she trusts this Chaoyun very much. A year ago, it was also Chaoyun who encouraged Miss Yan to go to Beijing to search for relatives. Chaoyun claimed that she had acquaintances in the countryside and wanted to go to Shengjing, so she could be a companion along the way. In fact, after leaving Yuezhou, she led Miss Yan to a small path where bandits were rampant. Undoubtedly, they encountered bandits and fled on their own in late autumn. As for the young lady, she was stabbed twice and almost insulted by the bandits. "Bring some hot water to my room, I want to take a shower." Yan Axiu didn't answer Chaoyun's question, but coldly ordered. She is not a person who particularly values the dignity of her master and servants. On the contrary, in the previous life, she and her parents never showed any airs of a master and son, and in the sinking mansion, the master and servants were as close as one family. People are different from each other, like the white-eyed wolf in late autumn. Miss Yan used to treat her so sincerely, but she didn't raise her well, and she wouldn't put in that effort. After Yan Axiu returned to his room, Chaoyun murmured softly, "What kind of bath should I take in the early morning?" Then he turned around and reluctantly followed the instructions to do things. Since the preface of a year ago, Ah Su survived the disaster and was sent back alive, his temperament has changed like a different person. In the impression of late autumn, Yan Axiu used to be a woman with little heart and soft ears, but now she has her own ideas and always treats them coldly and indifferently as servants. The most important thing is that Yan Axiu began to become mysterious in the first half of the year after her injury was healed. For example, she no longer needed people to watch at night, and she never lazed up before her injury. However, after her injury was healed, she often had to sleep until 3 days in the morning, as if she had not slept all night. She always liked to take a shower after waking up, and even return from outside in the early morning like today. Thinking like this in late autumn, her heart was startled. Could it be that she had a wild man outside, just like the rumors in the neighborhood? Chapter 4. Rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yan Axiu was soaking in the bathtub, letting the warm water take away her fatigue. She raised her arm and looked at the bruises on both sides of her delicate arms, probably due to Ning Tingzhou's excessive pressure on her body while doing that. Due to the damage to his tendons and meridians, Ning Tingzhou's entire lower body was ignorant and unconscious. Although ordinary doctors only used ordinary methods to nourish his tendons and meridians, this recovery was extremely slow. If he had waited for 10 or 20 years before he could seize that position to avenge the Sheng and Chen families, it would have been too late. She couldn't wait that long. She is just a ghost that has taken up someone else's body. Who knows when she will leave this shell? So, she took a different path. Among the 7 emotions and 6 desires of a person, only the strongest desire is horizontal. She first arouses Ning Tingzhou's desire with the strongest aphrodisiac fragrance, and at this time, she uses the secret acupuncture technique of the Chen family to move his acupoints and unblock his muscles and meridians, which can briefly restore his lower body consciousness. Over time, under the stimulation of this, the muscles and veins that originally took 10 to 20 years to recover can be restored to a healthy state in just 1 year. This method is like pulling up seedlings to promote growth. Although dangerous, it is also effective. But the drawbacks are also very obvious. For example, it is difficult for Ning Tingzhou and her not to cross the Thunder Pond under such a strong aphrodisiac. Yan Axiu gave a bitter smile and sank her whole body into the water. If my father is still alive, I must scold her for being too unconventional in her treatment. But deep down, she is a person who deviates from tradition and morality. If she had not deviated from tradition and morality, how could she have had the courage to fall in love with the crown prince of Wuying Marquis' mansion even though she knew there was a huge difference in status? If she had not deviated from the norm, she would not have secretly arranged for life with that man when there was no matchmaker or engagement. If she had not arranged for life with him, she would not have implicated the various experiences of the sinking family. But time can no longer turn back. If she were to be reborn back in the past, she would definitely seal her unconventional thoughts to death, adhere to the 3 principles and 5 constants, and be a well-behaved young lady, doing everything in her power to avoid all troubles for the Chen family. But she was reborn many years later, and now, besides doing her best to correct her father's name and make those enemies who had harmed her sink her family pay the due price, there seems to be nothing she can do. In this world, she no longer has a home, no family, and nothing. Yan Axiu suddenly stood up from the water, her eyes filled with cold hatred. She will never let those people go, even if the ultimate price is to burn jade and stone, she will pull them up and go to hell with her. At night, at 3 o'clock. In the western room, there was a faint sound that made people blush and blush. Soon, a woman sneaked out from inside, her cheeks blushing and her footsteps floating. It was late autumn. Chow Yun had a long mind tonight. After socializing with the 2 guards, she didn't rush back to her room to sleep, but instead came to explore outside Yan Axiu's room. The room was pitch black, and Chow Yun tiptoed forward, intending to push the window to take a look when she heard the door lock click. She quickly hid behind the pillar. A slender figure wearing a hood pushed the door open and walked quickly out of the yard. Late autumn covered her mouth, her eyes shining with excitement. Yan Axiu really goes out at night? No way. She wants to go see what she really wants to do. There is a curfew in Yuezhou City, and the streets and alleys are already empty in the middle of the night. Only a few red lanterns hanging high in front of the houses sway in the wind in the dark, as if they are a secluded ghost fire wandering in the world. After a day of rain and another night of wind, the sound of the wind passed by, sounding like ghosts crying and wolves howling. In late autumn, a heart suddenly jumps. On the one hand, she had never left the house late at night, fearing that the patrol would discover that she had violated the ban. On the other hand, she was thrilled to discover Yan Axiu's hidden secret. If Yan Axiu really had a private meeting with some wild man, then she will hold on to her handle in the future. Chow Yun seemed to see the large handful of silver waving at her in the Gu Mansion warehouse. The woman wearing a hood in front walked extremely fast, weaving through the streets like a ghost. Finally, she suddenly disappeared after turning into a small door with a seal attached. In late autumn, she lost her companion and stomped her feet in anger. Just as she was getting angry, she suddenly saw a discarded bundle on the ground and went up to pick it up. After opening it, she almost didn't jump up. Inside this bundle, there are actually some delicate gold and silver. Yan Ashu, is it true that she wants to elope with someone? Late autumn looked up at her surroundings, wanting to see where this was, but it didn't matter if she didn't look. After seeing it, she immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Originally, she was in the backyard of a circus troupe in Yuezhou City. The circus troupe used to be extremely lively in the city, with guests everywhere every day. However, during this chaotic time of war, people cannot eat much meat, let alone feed livestock. This is because the wild animals in the circus troupe cannot eat enough, and a few days ago, they bit and killed a juggler. The class leader was afraid that the government would commit a crime and fled overnight. The other members of the theater team also dispersed with the birds and beasts, but in the end, a group of animals were left unattended. The government had no choice but to seal off the theatrical troupe and release the group of animals to the mountains and forests tomorrow. In late autumn, I almost couldn't stand steadily. For many days, those animals have been locked here without anyone to feed them. Isn't it even more hungry? Did she hear something just now? Trembling and looking back, Chow Yun vaguely saw that the cage containing the wild beast seemed empty. Then, several pairs of yellow eyes silently appeared in the darkness. Late Autumn took a breath and crawled towards the small door, only to find that it was locked and could not be opened no matter how hard she pulled. Help! 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 She frantically slammed the door, but the circus troupe was already far away from the house, and there was a curfew at night, with no one around. Chow Yun peeked out through the crack of the door and suddenly saw Yan Qingli. She was standing quietly outside a door, staring at her. Late Autumn, as if seeing a savior, went crazy and begged Yan Axiu for help. Mississippi, open the door. Open the door quickly. Yan Axiu's lines remained motionless, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of her lips. How can we do that? I finally managed to lock it up, she said. Late Autumn knelt on the ground and kowtowed desperately. Mississippi. I'm wrong. I shouldn't have stolen silver from the mansion. Please. Please help me. Help me. Yan Axiu still stood still, with a deeper smile. In late autumn, we had a scene as masters and servants. I asked myself how I treated you well, but you actually wanted to harm me. As a person, I have always had clear grudges and grievances. A year ago, you almost killed me, so I will still give you this big gift today. With that, she put on her hood and turned around to blend into the darkness. Immediately from behind came the roar and mournful screams of wild beasts, and Yan Qingli did not turn his head back. A year ago, Late Autumn intentionally led Miss Yan onto the path where bandits were rampant, because one of the bandits was a good friend of Late Autumn. The gang of bandits colluded with Chow Yun, first deceiving Miss Yan out of the city, then they killed Miss Yan, and finally shared her property together. If she hadn't woken up on Miss Yan at that time, and if she hadn't happened to pass by while stopping the boat, then Yan Axiu would have turned into a cup of lust today. The woman wearing a hood lifted her head and looked at the stars in the sky, which flickered as if her relatives were watching her. Her father often taught her that as a doctor, she should have a kind heart and save every life. But she believes that doctors are not saints, at least she is not. She is just an ordinary person, unable to unconditionally tolerate those who hurt her. Since she was lucky enough to save her life, she swore that she would repay the harm inflicted on her in full. The sky began to rain again, as if someone was crying silently. Yan Axiu walked silently in the rain and finally arrived at Ning Tingzhou's house before the rain grew heavier. After opening the door and seeing Yan Qingli, Ji Xiang couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and said, Miss Yan, you have come. Did your highness fall asleep? How could that be? I've been waiting for you. Ji Xiang quickly brought Yan Qingli into Ning Tianlin's room, where a fragrant and elegant ink aroma wafted in. The room was not lit, but the window was open. Moonlight poured in from the window, allowing people to see things. At a glance, Yan Axiu saw the young man dressed in a bamboo blue robe reading under the moonlight. When he heard someone come in, he didn't look up and looked elegant like an independent nine heavenly immortal. Unfortunately, this immortal had suffered and could only sit in a wheelchair. Your highness is really elegant. Yan Axiu's gaze only lingered on the man for a moment, then turned around and lit the candlestick beside him. In the middle of the night, reading without lighting the lights is not afraid of blindness. Ning Tingzhou heard the teasing in her words, and the corners of her lips slowly curled up, finally willing to put down the book in her hand. Ah Su, it's already this hour, I thought you wouldn't come. Chapter 5. Needle Application. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 6. Handkerchief. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Shop owner, could you please give me 2 packets of osmanthus cake? As soon as the young master with a green robe and jade crown appeared in the pastry shop, he made a group of young girls and ladies take a straight look. It is rare to see a man with such magnanimity in the city of Yuezhou. Although he is dressed frugally, his noble aura cannot be concealed in any way. It is just a pity. Those women looked at the wheelchair under Ning Tingzhou's body and felt a deep regret in their hearts. Ji Xiang glanced sharply at the group of women, and immediately made the young ladies realize their mistake. They blushed and hurriedly left the shop. As they walked out, they couldn't help but look back. It's really a pity. Young master, why don't you go back earlier? Miss Yen said it's not advisable to see the wind after receiving the needle. After the group of women left, Ji Xiang earnestly advised Ning Tingzhou. On weekdays, in order to keep a low profile, I would rather stay on a boat and rarely go out. Today, for some reason, I suddenly came to the market to buy osmanthus cake. It's okay, let the sun shine on me. Otherwise, as a man, I would be even whiter than Axiu. Ning Tingzhou, with great interest, asked the shopkeeper for 2 packets of osmanthus candy. 6 years ago, the girl named Chen Haoshi praised Wu Xingji's osmanthus cake in front of his mother's concubine. He didn't pay much attention to the girl at the time, but now he can still remember this sentence. Wu Xingji is a shop in Shengjing, not in Yuezhou, but there are always ordinary pastry shops, including osmanthus cake. Did the young master buy it for his wife? Does the wife like the taste of osmanthus? We also have freshly baked osmanthus pastry in our shop, which is delicious and fragrant. How about taking it back and inviting the wife to try it? The shopkeeper smiled heartily and strongly recommended the new product of the shop. Most of his pastry shop is for sweets, and the usual guests are ladies and gentlemen. It is rare to see a young master, so the shopkeeper instinctively believed that this young master was bought for his wife. Ning Tingzhou was momentarily stunned when he heard the word madam, then smiled gently and said, could you please also wrap 2 packets of osmanthus pastry, shopkeeper? Don't worry, don't worry. The shopkeeper happily packed his bags, and Ning Tingzhou picked out a few other things. Perhaps seeing that he had bought quite a few, and seeing that the master and servant were strangers, the shopkeeper enthusiastically asked, young master, isn't he from Yuezhou? But are you coming to see the circus performance? If that's the case, then don't go. Ning Tingzhou raised her eyebrows and said, oh. Why? The shopkeeper sighed and said, the tiger raised by the circus team bit someone, and the leader ran away. The government had planned to release those animals, but someone was bitten again last night. The shopkeeper couldn't help but shudder as he spoke. I heard it was a maid who had bought the master's gold and silver and wanted to run away, but ended up accidentally entering the backyard of the circus troupe. For some reason, the group of animals were not locked in, so. When he came to the shop this morning, he happened to pass by the circus troupe, covered in blood and scattered fragments, which were so scary. The shopkeeper saw that Ning Tingzhou had a disability and a sickly appearance, afraid that he would feel scared after hearing it. After hesitating for a moment, he still did not describe the terrifying scene to him. Ning Tingzhou nodded thoughtfully and said, thank you very much for informing me. Leaving the pastry shop, Ning Tingzhou went to the largest restaurant in Yuezhou City and bought a famous braised goose here. Although the dishes cooked by the cook in the mansion are good, they don't have much novelty over time. They may buy some extra food to change their taste, but he doesn't have much appetite. On the other hand, Ah Su once tasted this braised goose and praised it a few times. Ning Tingzhou found a secluded corner on the first floor with Ji Xiang, as it was inconvenient to go to the elegant room on the second floor while sitting in a wheelchair. Two men, 5 in size and 3 in size, sat next to their master and servant. Waiter. Serve the best wine and dishes. Okay. Wait a moment, gentlemen. Jifu's expression stiffened as he lowered his head and whispered to Ning Tingzhou, Your Highness, these are the two guardians of Miss Yan's mansion. Ning Tingzhou remained calm and lowered her head to take a sip of tea. Big brother, you said there were only a few servants in the mansion, why did the young lady still be dismissed? Did she discover that we were with late autumn? Wang Er stepped on a chair with one foot, behaving roughly. Wang De threw a few peanuts into his mouth and said, Of course not. He wiped the oily smell from his hand onto his pants and lowered his voice. Miss is probably going to Beijing to find her biological father. Think about it, how can an illegitimate daughter survive without a support in Yuezhou? How many masters are waiting to take her as a concubine? Wang Er smirked and said, A illegitimate daughter, even if she comes to Shengjing, it will be her aunt's fate. Don't be a concubine for the master of Yuezhou, let's be a concubine for the master of Shengjing. Shengjing is all high-ranking officials. It's not better to be an aunt to a high-ranking official than these landlords in Yuezhou. I heard that Mrs. biological father is such an official. Wang De pinched a handful of peanuts and said with regret, I didn't expect that maid in late autumn would be brave enough to steal silver and run away. It's probably because we've already caught the wind. If we want to do that again in the future, we'll have to go to the flower tower. As soon as Wang Er mentioned it, he became angry and said, Damn it. That lowly maid borrowed 5 taels of silver from me yesterday. Come on, everyone is dead. Besides, she stayed with us for at least 2 months and was worth 5 taels of silver. Wang Er suddenly looked around and carefully took out something from his arms. Big brother, look at what this is. Is this Mississippi's handkerchief? Wang Da's eyes lit up and he said, Okay, buddy. Where did you get it from? Shoo. Wang Er's face was full of excitement. It was stolen from the laundry lady in the backyard. Look at it. It's so damn exquisite. Wang De leaned in and took a sniff, the faint fragrance of osmanthus and medicine scattered at the tip of his nose. Put it away quickly. Wang asked Wang Er to put away the handkerchief and smiled, it's truly from a wealthy family. The handkerchiefs are so exquisite that they can sell for a lot of money. A sharp gaze shot over, and Wang Dewang suddenly felt a chill all over his body. Looking up, he didn't see anyone, only a man in a wheelchair and his attendants passing by. Cut, what restaurant is the cripple coming to eat? Wang Er glanced at the backs of the master and servant, and continued to eat and drink with Wang De. After leaving the restaurant, Ning Tingzhou and Ji Xiang did not return to their residence. Instead, they turned into a secluded alley nearby. About half an hour later, 2 guards escorted Wang De and Wang Er to kneel in front of Ning Tingzhou. Heroes. Spare your life. We'll pay back the money tomorrow. Wang Dagua was extremely frightened. The 2 brothers were caught as soon as they left the restaurant, and the person who caught them was skilled. Unlike their fake tricks, they had real skills. The 2 even came to the gambling house to collect debts, indicating that when they saw the young man sitting in a wheelchair, they felt something was wrong. This. Young master, you. Wang Er recognized Ning Tingzhou and immediately slapped his big mouth. My stinky mouth. My stinky mouth. Young master, you have a lot, don't argue with me. Ning Tingzhou looked coldly at Wang Er and said, Take it out. Wang Er wondered how this person knew they had just received a severance payment. With a sense of luck in mind, he even tried to cover up, Young master, what are you taking? Ning Tingzhou had no patience to talk to Wang Er. He grabbed Wang Er's neck with one hand and almost lifted him off the ground. Take it out. Wang Er had difficulty breathing, his face turned purple, and he couldn't say a word. The king next to him shook like a sieve of bran early in the morning. The disabled man in front of him was obviously weak, but he was full of killing intent. Wang De believed that this man could really kill them. Seeing Wang Er roll his eyes, Wang Dalian quickly took out everything from himself and Wang Er, including silver and a women's handkerchief. Ning Tingzhou let go of his hand, and Wang Er immediately collapsed on the ground, covering his neck and coughing. Ji Xiang picked up the handkerchief with a handkerchief and handed it to Ning Tingzhou, young master. Ning Tingzhou held it in his hand, with a familiar aura still lingering on the smoky blue handkerchief. It was indeed Yan Axu's commonly used handkerchief, and he only saw her use it last night. Ning Tingzhou took out a torch and burned the handkerchief. Although there was a flicker in his eyes, it was icy cold. I cut off my hands and feet, threw it outside the city to feed the dog, he said. Wang Er suddenly lost his 7 souls and was about to beg for mercy when one of the dark guards covered his mouth. Ji Xiang pushed Ning Tingzhou out of the alley, and the warm sunlight shone on him. He was also a gentle and elegant young master. Clean up and don't cause any trouble for Ah Su. Chapter 7. Qing'er. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the early days of the establishment of the Ning dynasty, it was indeed extremely prosperous. Not to mention the distance, it has been pushed forward by Emperor Chonghui for 3 generations. Throughout history, emperors have always cared about the people of the world and worked for their well-being. But when he arrived at Emperor Chonghui, he began an unstoppable decline. Perhaps the foundation laid by his ancestors was too good. Emperor Chonghui was extravagant and indulged in pleasures to the fullest. Although his reign title was Chonghui, he never did anything to benefit the people. The late emperor passed away early, and Emperor Chonghui ascended to the throne at the age of 20. Now, during his 30 years in power, the Ning dynasty has been plagued by continuous wars and natural disasters, making people's lives extremely difficult. However, Emperor Chonghui still heavily donates taxes and levies taxes, and builds extravagant temples and palaces. The people of the Ning dynasty were filled with complaints, but unfortunately, under such circumstances, Emperor Chonghui still had the intention to make preparations for his birthday year after year. This year is even more so, marking the 50th birthday of Emperor Chonghui. All feudal lords and generals who are outside must rush back to Shengjing to pay their respects no matter where they are. Yan Axiu also plans to enter Beijing at this critical moment, but she cannot accompany Ning Tingzhou. In the eyes of the outside world, she is just an illegitimate daughter from a declining family. She has never left Yuezhou, and even if Ning Tingzhou has been in Yuezhou for the past 6 years, her identity is still hidden. The people of Yuezhou have no idea that there is still a prince living in this city, so they have no chance to meet each other and cannot fight. If she wants to enter the capital, she can only set off on her own or follow an ordinary caravan. Miss, you gave me too much silver. Grandma Lu. Yan Axiu handed over another body deed to the old man in front of her, showing her a sincere smile. Take it, it's all you deserve. She has no intention of returning to Yuezhou after entering Beijing this time. Her enemies were all in Shengjing, and she wanted to stay there no matter what, so the last few servants of Gu Mansion were also dismissed. It's just that one should keep a close maid, which is in line with Miss Yan's identity as a lady in the boudoir. Unfortunately, there is no one around her who can be used, and she doesn't want someone who would rather stop the boat. That's all. Among the several servants around Miss Yan, only this Grandma Lu was dedicated to serving her. She gave Grandma Lu enough silver to live in for the rest of her life and also set up a small house for her. Now that she has used Miss Yan's body, it is up to her to fulfill this master-servant relationship. Grandma Lu was extremely grateful and tearfully said, "Then let the old lady cook another meal for Mississippi Miss. Your journey to Shengjing is far away, so you must take extra care." After having dinner with Grandma Lu, Yan Axiu sent the old man out and then went alone to the Gu family ancestral hall. The ancestral hall enshrines the ancestors of the Gu family. She has never stepped into this place in the past year, but she is leaving tomorrow. Before leaving, she should come and burn incense. Who let her occupy Miss Yan's body? Yan Axiu kowtowed to the ancestors of the Gu family, Miss Yan's maternal grandfather, and mother, and then took out a nameless tablet from her sleeve and placed it at the bottom of the incense table. She put incense on the nameless plaque. Miss Yan, I will use your identity to recognize your family this time. Don't worry, your biological father owes Madame Gu, and I will retrieve it for you. If your family in Shengjing treat you badly, I will also help you return it. The candlelight in the ancestral hall was eerie, as if someone was really listening. Yan Axiu looked at the nameless plaque with sincere eyes and sincere words, saying, "But if you have a spirit in heaven, you should know that I carry a deep hatred of blood and sea. If I use your body to do something that you don't like, I hope you can understand. When my revenge is avenged, Chen Haoshi will handle it as a lonely and wild ghost without complaint or regret." After bowing 3 times, the woman walked out of the temple. Her figure looked so strong and upright, but it was also heartbreaking. A gentle breeze blew from outside the door, and the incense candles swayed in the ancestral hall behind her. A faint sigh could be heard. Tomorrow was about to depart, and Yan Axiu suddenly remembered that her luggage was not ready yet. Going to Shengjing from here can be as fast as a month, or as slow as a month and a half. It's not enough to just carry your belongings with you. The journey is long, and some desolate places don't have stations. Maybe you need to stay outdoors, and prepare everything in advance for clothing, food, housing, and transportation. When I was at Qing'er in the past, there were 2 maids, Yuzhu and Hongqiao, to take care of trivial matters. She had never worried about these things before. These days, she was only busy dealing with things in the house, but she had forgotten about these things. It's already dark now, and it's too late to go out and buy again. Yan Axia thought for a moment, but she could find some old clothes from Miss Yan's past, so she didn't know if there was still any dry food left in the kitchen. Just as I was about to turn around and head towards the kitchen, someone knocked on the door of the mansion. The House of Gu mansion is not large, only 3 courtyards, and the night is quiet. Yan Tingzhou stands in the center of the courtyard and can hear clearly. "Ah Su, it's me." Yan Axiu went forward and opened the door. Outside the door, it was indeed auspicious to push Ning Tingzhou. When he saw her, the man smiled politely. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Yan Axiu suddenly stopped halfway and stared blankly at the woman walking out from behind Ji Xiang. The woman was in her early 20s, with a delicate appearance, dressed in a bun and coarse linen clothes. When she saw Yan Axiu, her eyes were filled with tears and suspicion, and she asked with some uncertainty, "Mississippi? Are you a Mississippi?" Yan Axiu looked at the woman in disbelief, moved her lips, and her voice trembled. "Qing'er." Memories of the night when I was robbed flooded into my mind. That day was Shangyuan festival, and she was about to take 2 maids, Qing'er and Hongqiao, to see the lanterns. However, before she could reach the front yard, she suddenly saw officers and soldiers breaking in, claiming that her father had committed a crime and came to steal the house according to orders. Those officers and soldiers were inexplicably arresting people in the sunken mansion, with the men killed directly and the women shackled and taken to prison cars, to be exiled to the northwest to serve as military prostitutes. She ran back to the backyard with 2 maids in a panic and left the small door with her mother who was picking herbs in the pharmacy. Before leaving, the mother insisted on returning to the room to retrieve a token. They are now in a state of guilt, and even if they escape from the mansion, they cannot leave the city. There is a colonel in the city guard who has received favor from his father, and holding that token may allow them to leave the city. At that time, the situation was tense, and she did not agree with her mother's return to retrieve the token. However, her mother insisted on collecting it and asked them to leave first. Finally, Yuzhu pushed them all out of the yard, ran back to retrieve the token, and made an agreement to meet them in a side alley below the city gate. But they were caught by Su Qingyun before even leaving the sinking house. After Su Qingyun killed his mother and Hong Qiao, he set fire again. She thought Qing'er had also died, but she didn't expect Mississippi. It's really you. Qing'er didn't expect to see Miss again. Qing'er cried and ran forward, hugging Yan Axiu. Chapter 8. Surprise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The surprise came too suddenly, and Yan Axiu couldn't help but shed tears. She thought she had no family in this world, but didn't expect to see another one. The female relatives who were escorted to the northwest to serve as military prostitutes in the sunken house were soon attacked by the barbarians outside the border when they arrived in the army. The women in the army naturally fell into the hands of those barbarians and could not be reconciled. After being cruelly humiliated, they were all killed. When she learned about this, it was during the days when Su Qingfu was imprisoned and tortured in the backyard of the Su mansion. When Su Qingfu told her the news, the look of schadenfreude on his face was still vivid in her memory. Yan Axiu comforted and patted Qing'er, who was still crying, and then looked at the man sitting in the wheelchair with a moved expression. Qing'er, as a servant girl of Sin Minister, must have been hiding in obscurity for the past 6 years. Ning Tingzhou must have spent a lot of effort to find her, and she is grateful. There are many people here with mixed eyes. If you have anything to say, go in and say it, Ning Tingzhou reminded the two masters and servants who were hugging and crying. Although it was dark, the curfew had not yet begun, and it was inevitable that passers-by would pass by. Yan Axiu calmed down his emotions and invited everyone into the house. Originally, after Qing'er took out the token, she was trapped in the yard by a big fire and hid in the ice cellar to save her life. By the time she came out, the Chen family had already been burnt black. The officials did not expect anyone to survive, so they evacuated after the fire went out, while Qing'er hid in the ruins of the Chu mansion until it was dark before running out. At that time, the self-immolation of the mother and daughter of the Chen family had already spread throughout the streets and alleys. After crying loudly, Qing'er could only leave the city alone. She used a token to secretly find the city gate captain, and with the help of the captain, she managed to escape from Shengjing. After leaving Shengjing, Qing'er disguised herself as a refugee and headed west, intending to search for the Chu family's female relatives who were being taken to the northwest. However, halfway through, she fell ill again and was fortunately saved by a hunter. The hunter carefully took care of her, and Qing'er asked her to help inquire about the news of the northwest military camp. As a result, she learned that the female dependents had already died under the iron hooves of the barbarians. Qing'er had nowhere else to go, so she decided to marry the hunter and repay her life-saving kindness. Over the years, she had been living with the hunter. Do your husband know about this when you come to Yuezhou? Yan Axiu held the hand of Yuzhu. In her memory, Qing'er had only been separated from her for a year. However, in reality, the girl who used to be 2 years younger than her has now become a wife, a few years older than her, and has grown into a mature woman with the vicissitudes of time between her eyebrows and eyes. If Qing'er has a good home, Yan Ashu would rather she live a peaceful life than face those heavy burdens with her. Qing'er shook her head and said, Miss, Li Lang fell off a cliff while hunting. When the second prince's men found the servant had just buried him. Yan Axiu's breath paused, and she instinctively looked at Ning Tingzhou. Ning Tingzhou was slightly drooping her eyes, unsure of what she was thinking. Qing'er understood Yan Axiu's meaning and held her hand to Yan Axiu, wetting her eyes again. Miss, even if Li Lang is still alive, I will come to find Mississippi. I am also a member of the Chen family. You and my wife are my relatives. How could I live my own life with peace of mind when I found out that you are still alive? Ning Tingzhou had already informed Qing'er about the death and rebirth of Chen Haoshi. Qing'er cried out in pain, Miss, why were you and your wife so foolish back then? Why couldn't you think so hard? Why didn't you wait for Qing'er? Yan Axiu sighed and wiped Qing'er's tears with a handkerchief. Ning Tingzhou did not know that she had been tortured to death by Su Qingfu. Like others outside, he thought that the mother and daughter of the Chen family had died in that fire. As for why she didn't reveal the truth to Ning Tingzhou, it was because in her opinion, Ning Tingzhou was just an ally, and all he needed to do was climb up to that position to protect the name of consort Sheng and her father, and the rest had nothing to do with him. Just the context, Yan Axiu couldn't explain it to Qing'er in front of Ning Tingzhou. Alright, aren't I okay now? Stop crying, you didn't love to cry like that before. Yan Axiu's eyes have been sore ever since she saw Yuzhu. Her two maids, Qing'er and Hongqiao, one has a steady temperament and the other is playful and playful. In the past, those who used to cry were always blushing, and Qing'er often teased her. I never expected to have the opportunity to see Qing'er cry like this. Thinking of Hongqiao, Yan Axiu's mood became heavy again. Ah Su, it's getting late, so I'll go back first. You take these. Ning Tingzhou handed Qing'er's body deed and a cloth bag to Yan Axiu. Qing'er's identity has been falsely identified as a member of the Yuezhou people, and now she is the maid that Yan Axiu bought again after his death in late autumn, accompanying her to search for relatives in Shengjing. Yan Axiu collected Qing'er's body deed. She and Qing'er were as close as family and didn't need this thing, but when they arrived in Shengjing, the people of Yan Mansion might investigate their identities and keep them safe. At the moment of opening the cloth bag, the sweet fragrance of osmanthus wafted out, and Yan Axiu was slightly stunned. This is. She looked at the packets of oily paper-wrapped food, feeling somewhat bewildered. Tomorrow you and I will be separated temporarily. Take these with you, and you can fill your stomach if you're hungry on the way. Ning Tingzhou smiled and sat in his wheelchair, his blue long shirt making him appear even whiter. After saying these words, he began to cough lightly. Yan Axiu picked up his hand and felt his pulse. How could your highness suffer from the cold? Ji Xiang complained, these foods were personally bought by his highness for you, Miss Yan. Auspicious. Ning Tingzhou was a bit unhappy, it's okay, it's just a little cold. Ollie doesn't need to worry. Yan Axiu turned around and wrote a prescription for Ji Xiang, then said to Ning Tingzhou, please, your highness, do not do these things again in the future. Everything should prioritize your body. Ning Tingzhou lowered her eyes, covered her lost soles, and said, okay. Yan Axiu felt that she was too serious and couldn't help but relax her tone. Thank you, your highness. I haven't prepared these yet. Ah Su, there's really no need for such politeness between us. Ning Tingzhou stared at the beautiful and charming woman, with a flickering flame in her eyes, but the woman pretended to unintentionally avoid his gaze. The curfew is about to begin. I'll take his highness out. Yan Axiu did not let Yuzhu follow and personally escorted Ning Tingzhou out of the mansion. Ah Su, let's deliver it here. You should rest earlier and make your way tomorrow. Yan Axiu nodded and saw that Ji Xiang was about to push Ning Tingzhou away. Suddenly, she called out to him, Second Prince. Ning stopped the boat and turned around. Yan Axiu's expression was complex. Did you send someone to arrange the incident of Qing'er's husband falling off the cliff? In order to let Qing'er return to her side without any worries, Ning Tingzhou is highly likely to do such a thing. Ning Tingzhou remained silent, with a faint smile on his face. After a moment, he whispered, no. Yan Axiu breathed a sigh of relief. At that moment, she was really afraid that he would say, yes. If Qing'er's husband was really killed by him, she wouldn't know how to face Qing'er in the future. However, the man under the moonlight lowered his eyes, as gentle as a banished fairy. There was still a breath left after the hunter fell off the cliff, and my people did not save him. Yan Axiu was slightly stunned. Ning Tingzhou raised her head and said, Ah Su, will you blame me? Chapter 9. Go to Shengjing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Thank you, Your Highness. It's not even time yet. I thought there were no more relatives in this world. Yen Axiu smiled. That's good. The next morning before dawn, Yen Axiu and Qing'er left Gu Mansion. After the gate was locked, she glanced back at the black painted plaque. I don't know when I can come back after leaving. Yen Axiu had already found a caravan to go to Wanqing a few days ago, and Wanqing was only a few days away from Shengjing, which was also considered the same route. The caravan hired an escort to accompany them, and Yen Axiu originally planned to provide some escort silver, but the caravan's owner refused to accept anything and openly stated that Yen Axiu had cured his young son of smallpox in the beginning. Yen Axiu believes that one code is one code, and she also received a medical fee for treatment at that time. But the owner also said that this journey is far away. If anyone in the team suffers from acute cold and wind, it is necessary to trouble Dr. Yen Axiu to take care of them. In this way, Yen Axiu no longer declined and only hired a driver to drive for her and Qing'er alone. At the moment of Mao, Yen Axiu's master and servant met with the caravan in front of the city gate, and the group of carts and horses staggered onto the road to Shengjing. In the carriage, Qing'er still had red eyes. Last night, Yen Axiu had already told her how she died and why the Chen family had suffered. When she heard that Wen Yu had actually married Su Qingfu, Qing'er almost fainted. Yen Axiu is much calmer now, and in the year after her rebirth, she often recalls the past. At that time, Wen Yu should not have known about the torment Su Qingfu had inflicted on her. In Wen Yu's eyes, Su Qingfu was still the gentle and polite young lady. It's just. Even if he doesn't know, it's true that he married a new couple only 2 months after his old lover died. It's false to say he didn't feel cold. Miss, let's have some food. Yuzhu took out a piece of osmanthus cake from the food brought by Ning Tingzhou last night and handed it to Yen Axiu. Yen Axiu was a bit lost in thought as she held the osmanthus cake. Suddenly, she asked, Qing'er, how has your husband treated you over the years? Qing'er didn't expect Yen Axiu to ask her about her. She was momentarily stunned, and then her expression became somewhat gloomy. At first, Li Lang treated me well, but after I recovered from my illness, I injured my body and never became pregnant. Afterwards, Qing'er pursed her lips and said, a while ago, Li Lang took a widow from the foot of the mountain as his concubine. That day when he entered the mountain, he wanted fox hunting fur to make a fur coat for the new couple. Unexpectedly, something unexpected happened. In other words, Su was stunned this time. She immediately took Qing'er's hand and sounded her pulse, and Xiu's eyebrows gradually tightened. It's been too long, and it's probably difficult for Qing'er to recover her body. It's okay, forget about that heartless man. In the future, I'll find a good person for you. Yen Axiu tried hard to show a smile, trying to comfort Qing'er. Qing'er exclaimed in fear, no, no. Men in the world are so ungrateful. Miss, don't push the maidservants into the pit of fire. Even if the second prince's people didn't find the maidservants, they already planned to leave Li Lang. Qing'er took Yen Axiu's arm and felt a bit aggrieved. Anyway, Qing'er will only stay by Mrs. side from now on and won't go anywhere. Yen Axiu felt a pang of bitterness in her heart. She had never loved someone wrong before, and she didn't know how to comfort Qing'er. So she had to follow her and sigh softly, yes, there are many ungrateful men in the world. Qing'er heard the sadness in Yen Axiu's tone and raised her head to smile, not entirely. I'm just looking at your Highness and personally bought osmanthus cake for Miss to eat. Yen Axiu couldn't help but laugh, look at your unremarkable appearance. A little food will buy you in. No way. I really think the lower body of the second hall is very close. The master and servant laughed and frolicked, and when they had enough, Yen Axiu looked out the window. Has Wen Yu ever been so meticulous and thoughtful towards her? I didn't just turn around and marry the woman next to me. The caravan traveled along official roads for over half a month. They traveled by day and stayed at post stations or cities at night. Except for passing through several drought-stricken cities and encountering a few refugees begging for food, everything else went smoothly. It just seems like there's trouble today. What's wrong? Yan Axiu lifted the curtain and asked the coachman. As the coachman was about to answer, the bodyguard in front rushed over and said, "Miss Gu, you're ready. We're going to stay outside today." When Yan Axiu was 10 years old, although he was brought back to the Gu family by his maternal grandfather, Mr. Gu still held a grudge against his daughter's infidelity, so he did not allow Yan Axiu to use the Yan surname externally. Yan Axiu was taken aback and said, "Why don't you enter the city? They have arrived outside the city of Lansang, and there is no post station nearby. It is said that they should stay in the city today. It wasn't for the riots in Rongyang City a few days ago, where many people died and there was an epidemic. The county governor of Lansang was afraid that the disaster victims would bring the epidemic into the city, so he closed the city gate. Even if there were clearance documents, they wouldn't allow anyone to enter. Let's continue on our journey, where we go counts." The escort wiped a sweat off his forehead, and as he left Yuezhou, the weather became hotter and hotter as he walked south. Unlike the customers who could sit in the carriage, several of them were affected by the heat. Fortunately, Miss Gu took the initiative and didn't delay their journey much. These bodyguards have also heard some rumors about Yan Axiu's mother before, and they still have some disdain for Yan Axiu's behavior of being a doctor in public. However, along the way, they have also improved a lot, so they come to inform her of anything. Qing'er helped Yan Axiu out of the carriage, and from afar, there were indeed many carriages and horses surging in front of the gate of Lansang City, but more were still some sick and weak refugees. It's already late today, and if we continue on our journey, we won't be able to reach the next city. Instead of staying in the wilderness, it's better to make ends meet outside the Lansang City for the night. The bodyguard disagreed and thought to himself that Miss Gu was a woman of the lower class, and her knowledge was shallow. He claimed that there were too many refugees outside the city of Lansang, and their group carrying food was easily looted by the refugees. It would be even worse if anyone contracted an epidemic as a result. Yan Axiu still feels a bit inappropriate. No matter how many refugees there are, they are just unarmed civilians. Moreover, those people who are sick cannot stand stable. They have so many bodyguards around, what is there to be afraid of? At most, it's just letting them steal some food. The most important thing is to camp right next to Lansang City, with the city wall guard standing up. Bandits and the like will not come under the watchful eye of the officers and soldiers to cause chaos, but if they go far, it's hard to say. But their business is not Yan Asu's the final say. Both the caravan owner and the chief escort thought it was better to keep going, and Yan Asu could not say anything more. After it was completely dark, they were indeed in a territory where there was no village in front and no shops behind. "Qing'er, hold on a bit, don't sleep tonight for now." Yan Axiu looked at the wilderness outside the carriage, feeling a bit uneasy in her heart. Qing'er nodded and took out a dry cake and a pot of water. "Miss, let's make do with it today." Ning Tingzhou had already finished the food she had prepared before her trip, which she bought at the post station yesterday. "Sister Gu." A childish voice came from outside the carriage. Yan Axiu lifted the curtain and saw the young son of the merchant caravan owner standing below holding 2 bowls of hot soup. Seeing her, his small face showed a shy smile and said, "Auntie asked me to give you this wild pigeon soup to taste." The owner of the caravan on this trip came out with his beloved concubine. Yan Axiu looked forward and saw that the caravan had already set up an iron pot on the ground, which was steaming hot, presumably boiling soup. And the owner of the caravan was ordered to camp with his followers. A woman wearing a willow green embroidered long dress was looking towards Yan Axiu, and after meeting Yan Axiu's gaze, she immediately waved her hand warmly, which was the beloved concubine of the caravan owner, Yu Shi. At first, Yan Axiu cured Yu's son of smallpox, and along the way, Yu also took many photos of her and Qing'er, occasionally asking his son to personally bring some food to use. Yan Axiu nodded to you as a gesture of gratitude, then turned around and grabbed a handful of osmanthus candy from the carriage and stuffed it into the boy's hand. She touched his head and said, "Thank you for me, Aunt." The boy nodded and ran away with a red face. The night is still stuffy, with cicadas chirping one after another, accompanied by the chirping of owls, and no trace of cool breeze. The people in the caravan were already snoring in the tent, and the bodyguards were divided into two groups, taking turns to be on duty, but also fulfilling their duties. Yan Axiu asked the coachman to go down and rest with the followers of the caravan, while she and Qing'er planned to stay in the carriage. At this moment, the jade bamboo, which had just been forcefully propped up, also began to drop her head frequently. Yan Axiu couldn't help but feel drowsy when she saw this. Just as she was about to squint for a moment, she suddenly heard 100 birds in the forest flapping their wings together. Qing'er. As soon as Yan Axiu finished speaking, a whoosh sound of breaking through the air came from outside the carriage, followed by the escort's shout. "There are thieves." Chapter 10. Moon Wound. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yan Axiu immediately pulled Qing'er to the ground. As soon as they fell, the arrows pierced through the wall of the carriage. In the next moment, a series of screams came from outside the carriage, with the cries of children and the screams of women mixed in, making it particularly piercing. "They have women. Kill everyone. Kill everyone. Leave no survivors." The sound of fighting and the sound of weapons clashing with each other could be heard incessantly. Yan Axiu lifted a corner of the car curtain, and the one who caught her eye was the escort who was talking to her during the day. The escort was holding an arrow in his chest, staring intently without closing his eyes. They were a group of over 40 people in total, half of whom died in the recent attack, including the caravan owner. The bodyguards were also shot by arrows, and there were less than 10 people standing and fighting, but there were at least 20 thieves in this group. They were well trained and didn't seem like ordinary thieves. Seeing that those bodyguards couldn't hold on anymore, Yan Axiu made the decision in an instant. To run. "Qing'er, let's go." Their carriage was parked next to a big tree, which was a good cover. Yan Axiu and Qing'er quietly got off the carriage and directly entered the dense forest. The last bodyguard also fell, and the group of thieves began to chase and block Yushur and her 4 maids. They were frightened and ran around, but could not escape the encirclement of these people. "Go away. Go away. Don't." A thief caught a maid with a lewd smile and pressed her directly onto the ground. "I haven't eaten meat for a while now." Behind her came the sound of clothes cracking and the woman's mournful screams. Yan Axiu couldn't help but pause and turn around to look. There are less than 20 thieves left. The injured are counting goods and food, while the others are teasing the women. 3 or 2 people are grabbing one and tearing off their clothes. "Auntie! Let go of my aunt." The young boy rushed out from the side and fiercely bit the leg of a thief, preventing them from bullying his mother. Where did that little rabbit come from? The boy was carried aside by a thief with his legs lifted upside down. Upon seeing this, Yushur, who was unaware of where he came from, drove the thief off his body like a madman and rushed out. As a result, he was kicked to the ground again, and immediately spat out blood. The thief who kicked him bullied and pressed down on Yushur, slapping her twice, making Yushur dizzy and unable to resist anymore. "Stinky girls. See if I don't kill you." Reason told Ah Su to walk quickly, but his feet seemed to have taken root and couldn't move no matter how hard he tried. In the evening, the smile on Yu's face as Yen waved to her was still vivid, and the hot soup given to her by the boy was still warming her body. She couldn't just leave like this. "Mississippi, let's go." Qing'er couldn't bear to look anymore, but what could the two of them do? "If you go out rashly, you may even catch up with yourself." Yan Axiu gritted her teeth and looked up at the sky, the stars in the night sky quietly watching her. "Well, if we just leave like this, even if we get revenge in the future, we won't have the face to go see our parents. Qing'er, I see these people are not ordinary bandits. They are all wearing cloth armor, and many of them are still injured. If I'm not mistaken, they should be the remnants of the Rongyang rebellion who escaped. Qing'er was anxious and said, then you can't take any risks. Mississippi. She understood Yan Axiu and knew that she probably couldn't bear to leave those women behind, but she couldn't go to die for nothing. Yan Axiu thought for a moment and whispered in her ear to Qing'er. The group of thieves were about to take action against Sher and others when suddenly an arrow shot out of the woods and landed on the buttocks of the thief who was preparing to kill the boy. Oh my God, my lord! Someone attacked, and the group of remaining soldiers immediately became on guard, but the forest was dark and there was no ambush. One of the small leaders with scars on his face observed for a moment and shouted, I dare not show my face, there must not be many people, let's chase after them. Yan Axiu let go and ran towards the depths of the forest. The thieves almost all chased after Yan Axiu, leaving only 2 injured soldiers to tie up the women and guard them. Seeing this, Qing'er, who was hiding in the grass, picked up the stolen bow and arrow and shot at the 2 wounded soldiers. She has been married to a hunter for 6 years, but she doesn't know anything else. This bow and arrow can be used for a while, but the accuracy is not very good. Moreover, it was her first time shooting a live person, and her hand trembled a bit. She only shot on the leg of 1 wounded soldier. Fortunately, the wounded soldier had just been hit by an arrow in the buttocks, so he couldn't move anymore and fell to the ground in pain, howling. She quickly shot at another one and luckily hit the nail on the head. Qing'er stumbled out of the forest and untied the women. When these women saw someone coming to save them, they burst into tears with excitement. Qing'er quickly silenced them. Yusha recognized her as Yan Axiu's maid and nervously asked, where's Miss Gu? Why haven't she been with you? Miss, we're going to distract those people. Let's go first. Qing'er was so worried that Yan Axiu was so worried that even her hand to untie the rope trembled. Just now, Su confidently told her that His Highness II has sent someone to secretly protect her and will come to her rescue in a critical moment. She will not be in danger of her life. But now Qing'er is afraid that it was Yan Axiu deliberately deceiving her. She only wants to quickly send these women to a safe place and then go back to find Yan Axiu. A wounded soldier was still struggling to get up and said, Don't leave. Everyone stop. Yusha turned around and recognized the thief who was going to kill her son just now. She immediately ran back and kicked the person a few times, then pulled out the arrow on his body and stabbed it wildly, turning the thief into a sieve. In the end, she was pulled away by Qing'er and a few maidservants. On Yan Axiu's side, the thieves who were chasing after were afraid of ambush and divided into several routes, and one of them had already discovered her. She was agile in shape and the forest was dark. She hid around inside and even found an opportunity to sprinkle poison powder on 2 of them, but the poison she carried was limited. Miss Yan's body was weak, and she quickly couldn't run, being chased by the remaining Scarface. Stinky girls. Look where you're still running. Hiss. Scarface grabbed Yan Axiu's clothes, and Yan Axiu immediately fell to the ground. Scarface pounced on Yan Axiu. At first glance, he caught a glimpse of her beautiful appearance and was stunned for a moment. Yan Axiu immediately pushed her knee up hard, and Scarface seemed to hear the sound of his own egg shattering. The painful scars twisted, and he waved his hand and slapped her. Not far away, the black-clad guard Changfeng, hidden in the tree, always paid attention to Yan Axiu's situation. Before coming out, he was instructed not to appear unless absolutely necessary, so as not to be discovered in the future when the Yan Mansion sends people to investigate the details of Miss Yan and find out that she is related to Second Prince. But Yan Axiu's situation is no longer good, and Changfeng is ready to take action. But at this moment, he suddenly saw the scarred face fall off Yan Axiu's body in a daze. Yan Axiu threw the silver needle from her hand, wiped away the blood from her lips, and patted her body to stand up. Scar's face just felt stabbed by something, and then he became completely numb and unable to move. His throat froze and he could only make a whimpering sound. He rolled his eyes and stared at Yen Axiu in terror. Yen Axiu pulled out the dagger from behind his scarred face and waist, about to stab it. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of a crescent-shaped sword wound under his damaged armor. The sword wound had not yet healed, and it curved diagonally into a sharp cut. After the blood seeped out, it looked like a crescent moon stained with blood. Yen Axiu frowned and said, "Where did you get this injury from?"